everybody, and welcome to another board game review and gameplay demo. Today is going to be not another board game, but actually a card game in this case, and one that I talked about very recently in my top 5 games about time travel. Now, for those of you who watched it and, oh. Okay, well, when you will have watched it, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But one of my biggest things about time travel is that it's very difficult to translate to a board game. You have a huge amount of trouble showing that something in the past is affecting the present, and essentially having different pieces on different sections of the board moving around and shifting around, and it's very difficult to put that efficiently and effectively into a game. There are a few games that do it very well, and whenever it intersects here, then you guys should watch my video on it, because it's kind of cool and I want to hear what you guys have to think. But for now, at least, I'm going to be talking about this little game called Chrononauts. In Chrononauts, the idea is that every player is playing as a time agent, and the whole point is that you have been hired to go and fix the timeline. One of the coolest things about this game that I love is the fact that it's actually based off of actual historical events. We've got things ranging from the Kennedy and Lincoln assassinations up to, well, there's actually a lot of assassinations, but there's things like World War II, Sputnik being launched, the Challenger exploding, just all sorts of stuff, both comparatively good and comparatively bad. But the whole point is that they are all important historical events, and they're put in the context of other downstream events. So it's really cool because if one thing before changes, then it has sort of a ripple effect down the timeline. I love the way that this game does it, and in the case of most time travel games, I find that simplicity is generally the way to go. If you have a more complex game, then it makes it a lot more difficult to keep track of everything, but I repeat myself. For now, I'll be talking about Chrononauts, where you are trying to fix the timeline, and essentially, whenever one of these main events does not occur, then it causes a time paradox. It's a temporal paradox, and you as a time agent have to go and fix these paradoxes. And it's really interesting. It's really cool. There are 3 different ways to win. You can either win with your character-specific goal that you've got, you have a mission to collect specific artifacts, or you can just have a whole bunch of cards, because then you have like all the power, blah. You have the power of time and space, and you can control and move things as you see fit. It's really neat, very quick little card game. It's got some pretty solid solitary rules, and it plays up to 6. So it's a really good example of how not only you can do time travel well, but it's a great filler game because it only takes about 20 minutes. It's made by the same company that made Flux, Looney Labs. So if you have played Flux, then you know at least the very basics of how Chrononauts works, which is obviously tremendously helpful. They are not exactly the same though, but I'll get into that in just a little bit. So that's pretty much it. It's a great example of how to do time travel well. I hope that you like watching this video, and without further ado, I'll go right on ahead into what this game is similar to. As far as similarities for Chrononauts, the biggest and easiest one is the one that I've already mentioned, which is the Flux series. If you've played it, you know the basic idea with Flux is you start off with draw 1, play 1. You've got different rules, different goals, different keepers, creepers, all of these kinds of different things. Very fast game, very easy to learn and play, etc., etc. Chrononauts uses many of the same mechanics in that you have, on a most basic level, draw a card, play a card. The different cards will do different things. You have artifacts, which are equivalent to keepers, where you put them face up in front of you. You've also got gadgets, which do numerous different things in terms of helping you out or hurting you and things of that nature. One of the cool things about Chrononauts, though, is that you've got an individual identity, and depending on what your identity is, you will have a certain goal for the timeline. The idea is that you're trying to get back to your own time. You also have a mission that you can try to complete to win, or you can just gather a bunch of cards. There are three ways to win. So it's a really cool little game. It is very similar to Flux, but not so similar that you would immediately know exactly how to play. But at the same time, similar enough that I can say they are comparable to an extent. Other than that, the game is great. It plays 1 to 6 people. It has some really nice solitary rules. It's got a separate game essentially for solitaire play. It's better with more people. It's also extremely quick. So you can compare this to pretty much any relatively quick and easy to pick up and play card game. And you guys know there are innumerable ones, so I don't have time to go over very many. But the Flux series is the easiest because it's from the same company, uses very similar mechanics, and that's pretty much all you really need to have with something this small. But either way, I will go right on ahead now into how to play the game. Alright everybody, we're just about completely set up and ready to play some Chrononauts. You can see that everything is card based, and the central focus of this whole thing is this timeline that's made up of two different types of cards. We've got linchpin cards that are purple, and we've got ripple point cards which are blue. The way that these work is throughout the game we'll be flipping over the linchpin events, and in doing so it will cause ripples in time that create paradoxes. So for example, for this very first one right here, we've got Lincoln being assassinated and Andrew Johnson being impeached. So the Lincoln being assassinated is a linchpin. You can see that right above his hat there, and you can see it happened in 1865 on April 14th. Andrew Johnson being impeached happened in 1868 on February 24th. Now you can see that for the ripple point, it is paradoxed if Lincoln's hat is prime. So in other words, if Lincoln's hat is flipped over, if it is in a different state of temporal flux, so to speak, that means that Andrew Johnson's impeachment does not happen. And essentially the point is that we start off with the timeline being the reality that we know, the reality that we're familiar with, where Lincoln was assassinated, Hitler hosted the 1936 Olympics, Sputnik was launched, etc., etc. All of these things happening in our reality. And essentially what will happen is throughout the game you'll be able to flip these over to their prime state. And if you know math, then you can see the little prime symbol, the little apostrophe there on the 1865, where Lincoln was wounded instead of being assassinated. So he was attempted to be killed, but he was not. And because Lincoln was not killed, that means that this card would get flipped over to its paradox side, because this event did not occur the way that it was supposed to. So now we have a temporal paradox. In addition, on the linchpin cards themselves, these purple and red cards, you can see it's got the ripples right there listed, in this case for 1868 and 1974. In 1974, that was the year that Nixon resigned. So you can see here, this one says paradoxed if both Lincoln was wounded and JFK was only wounded instead of assassinated. There are several cases for those where you have Boolean operators that indicate and or. Here's an example right here with the Cuban Missile Crisis, where it was it narrowly avoided World War III, and it's paradoxed if either the Manhattan Project failed or if Sputnik was not launched, and then you would flip it over and it has become a paradox. And then it's restored if both are correct, because again, it's paradoxed if either one is wrong, so it comes back if both of them are right. Okay, makes sense at least somewhat. Once I get started playing, then I'm sure you'll be able to catch on relatively quickly. It's a really interesting game, and the idea is that it's essentially one giant thought experiment, which is something I really like. It makes you really think critically about historical events and think like, what would have happened if the Titanic didn't sink? I don't know. That's a good question. Let's think about it. And, you know, stuff like that. It's really cool. And on the website for the company, Looney Labs, they actually have a list of the designer's sort of thought process for deciding what the ripple effects were, how they got there, and what occurred, etc., all that kind of stuff. It's really cool. Very exciting. Now, the idea is that every player who's playing will have an ID card. These ID cards represent, obviously, who you are playing as. Now, for each one, you have a nice little story so that you can see like the person's history and things like that. And then you also have 3 dates and states in them. So in this case, we've got Werner, and And he's got 3 dates, 1939, 1974, and 1991. And essentially what this means is that this is the state of reality that this particular person is from. All of the characters are out of their own realities. And one of the ways that you win is by making the timeline have these 3 events. If you do that, then you win. That's one way of doing it. So in this case, the 1939 and 1974 are respectively Germany invading Poland, and then 74 is Nixon resigning. So both of those would have to be flipped over to the paradox side, and then the Soviet Union would still need to collapse in order for Werner to be back home in his correct timeline. That's one way to win this game. Another way to win the game is to complete a mission. Mission cards are going to be had by every person as well, and these have all sorts of different stuff. So here's tomorrow's ancient wisdom today. You can see for all of these they have a little bit of flavor text, and then they have a list of artifacts that you need to have in front of you. Again, the artifacts are sort of akin to Flux's Keepers. They're just cards that you put in front of you. Here you got tomorrow's newspaper today, ancient wisdom, and videotape of the creation of the universe, which, by the way, is on Betamax. So very exciting there. Okay, those are 2 of the ways to win. The other major way to win is just to have 10 of the cards in your hand at any time or at the end of your particular turn. Right? Again, this is a very quick game. Really cool because of the sort of thought-provoking environment that it gives you. A very unique in that sense. Obviously, I'm going to play through it, but first I'll explain what some of these cards do. So there are a handful of different types of cards. I believe there's 5. I'll obviously be going through all of them. One of the types of cards is the Inverter Card. This is one that does exactly what it says. You flip any linchpin. So those are the purple cards. When you flip the linchpin, then you got to check on the ripple points and make sure that you either flip them as appropriate, including going back to being unparadoxed if need be. And there are also specific types of inverters that are only usable on certain linchpins. For example, with the Avert Disaster, you can stop the Titanic or the Lusitania from sinking or the Hindenburg from crashing. In addition, there is an expansion called the Gore Years, and you can see there are a couple others that this works on, where you've got the DC and Chicago fires and the Twin Towers in 2001, and you can stop those with that. Unfortunately, I don't have any of the expansions for this game. It only goes for me from 1865 up to 1999, but they do have more cards and more thought-provoking things as well. One of the other types of cards is a patch. Now, the patches are very important because one of the ways that you lose this game is if you have 13 active paradoxes. And essentially what that means in the context of the game is that time and space has been torn so asunder that there's no way that you can repair all of the ripples and all of the holes in time. So the idea is that you're going through, and one of the key things to do is to try to fix paradoxes. So for example, here with the 1962 patch, if this 1962 ripple point is flipped, the Cuban Missile Crisis is paradoxed, then what you would do is you would put the patch on top of it, and it has nullified the particular paradox. Now, this one is very special, and it makes what's called the Uber paradox, because what this does is it causes World War III. The Cuban Missile Crisis did not occur because what happened instead was thermonuclear war. And what happens in this particular case is nothing from the future is accessible. Everything after 1962 is inaccessible, and the way that the instructions say it is that you're supposed to move all the cards down so that you can show that people can't affect anything past that because there's no world left, right? So I just wanted to show that because it's one of the unique ones, right? Here's another type of card, just a regular action card. Again, throughout this game, all you're going to be doing is drawing a card, playing a card. In this case, you perform a, quote, miracle. And the idea is that you discard an artifact, and then you draw 2 cards, play 1, discard 1. The other interesting thing with this is if you have a biblical relic, such as the Crown of Thorns or the Ark of the Covenant, then you actually draw 3, and then you get to play 2 and discard 1 of them. So it's, a lot of the humor in this is kind of tongue-in-cheek like that, somewhat similar to Munchkin, but yeah, there's all sorts of crazy stuff. One of the other card types is the Time Warp. In this case, you got Rewind, which is remove any card from the discard pile and immediately play it. The idea behind the time warps is they're essentially more intense versions of actions. They allow you to do bigger and better things. This is an example of an artifact. It's a live Tyrannosaurus. His name is Rex. See, it says his name is Rex. And this is the type of card where when you play it, you would just put it in front of you on the table so that everybody knows that you have played this artifact and it is yours. Okay, I wanted to go over something else as well here, something else that's special, which is for 1945. 1945 is very unique because it is the end of World War II. If it is paradox, there's actually 4 different ways you can fix it. You've got Tokyo being nuked, you've got world peace, you've got Allied troops invade Tokyo, or you've got Nazis win. And you can see on each one of these, it says nullified if and then playable only if. And it's got linchpin requirements for each one of them. So it's just interesting because this is what's called an unstable patch. It's the only one that's in this game. I don't know if there are any in the expansion, but it's just something interesting I wanted to show you. And actually, there's one other fun one that I wanted to, one other fun artifact I wanted to show as well. But again, it's a cool little game. It's very, very fun. I'll get started as soon as I find the other thing I'm thinking of. Oh, here's one of the other things too. So there are 3 different versions of the Mona Lisa in here. There is the obvious forgery, which is this one right here, the real one, and then there's also a very good forgery. So you can see in this one, she's got a mustache. So it is quite obviously a forgery. And she has a ridiculous smile. Absolutely insane. But it's pretty fun. So there's the excellent forgery. You can see she's winking because, you know, it's still a forgery. And, you know, you can't be awesome like that. So, oh, man, where is it? There's the cure for cancer. There it is. See, the videotape of the creation of the universe on Betamax. Recovered from day 1. Don't erase 001. So, like I said, very tongue-in-cheek, very almost Munchkin-like sense of humor for this. So if you like those types of games, then you'll probably like this. I'm going to go ahead and distribute cards, IDs, and all that kind of stuff. I'll be playing with effectively 3 players, and I'll show you sort of the general progression of how it works. All right, so we're all ready to go. The official rules for who goes first is you have to guess what time it is, and whoever gets closest gets to go first, but you can obviously do whatever you want. So let's take a look at what we've got. We have Oliver, who needs to have Woodrow Wilson keep the U.S. out of World War I, the stock market actually crashing in 1929, and President King takes office, also known as Rodney King in this particular case. And then the mission for Oliver here is to obtain the Great Mysteries, which are the Rongo Rongo tablets, the Lost Ark of the Covenant, and the videotape of the creation of the universe. So again, if either of those conditions are fulfilled, if you get the exact the prime dates and the regular date fulfilled, you win. If you collect all 3 of those artifacts in front of you on the table, you win. Right, that's one way to do it. Oh, here we have Mr. X. The Zeppelin factory is opened in Seoul, South Korea, as opposed to the Korean War occurring. Martin Luther King and Robert, is it Franklin Kennedy? Geez, I can't even remember his name now, are both murdered, and then Koresh's ministry opens a hospital instead of the Oklahoma City bombing occurring, basically. And then the Museum of Lost Treasures, needing ancient wisdom, the Rongo Rongo tablets, and the Lost Ark of the Covenant. Dun, dun, dun. Very Indiana Jones so far. And then we have Yitzhak. sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, means Europe to remain in ruins after World War II. Nuremberg race laws repealed, as opposed to basically World War II occurring and Hitler starting the final solution, and then again coerces military opening the hospital in lieu of the Oklahoma City bombings. And here, the cheaters sometimes win. You need the sports almanac for the future. That sounds relatively familiar, especially around this time of the year. And never mind. And then you need either of the Mona Lisa forgeries, either the really good one or the lame one, and then Shakespeare's last play. So again, these are the cards that remain secret from all the other players, so you don't show it to anybody. But at the same time, you need to be aware of what you've got and what you're trying to do, so you can start switching out the lich pins and doing the ripple points and all that kind of stuff. So I'll play through a couple of rounds, hopefully get through all of the rules. If I don't do it sort of naturally, then I'll go ahead and just explain the rest of the things, though. So we'll just go in order here. So again, the first thing that you do is you draw a card, and then you play it. So this guy got Shakespeare's last play, so I'm going to play that. So draw a card, play a card. And then same thing here. Let's see here. So draw a card and play a card. So here we go. They're going to go ahead and play the Avert Disaster, which allows you to flip either the Titanic, the Lusitania, or the Hindenburg. And in this case, they're going to go with the Hindenburg. So let's see, 1937. So flip that. It's got a ripple effect for 1950, which is right here, which means that Seoul captured by North Korea is paradoxed. Oh no! What are we going to do? Now, one of the interesting things about doing the patches is that you have to have the patch for that exact time. If you don't have that exact time patch, then you can't patch it. And again, after you get 13 paradoxes, the game is over and everybody loses, which is very, very unpleasant. And you don't want that, right? So next, let's see what we got. We've got, okay. Let me see. What were the things again? We will go ahead and reverse fate, right? So flip any linchpin, and in this case, they're just going to go right up here to the sinking of the Lusitania. So this has ripple effects in 1917 for U.S. declaring war on Germany, and in 1933, which is the Great Depression. So you can see here, this is paradoxed only if both the Titanic doesn't sink and the Lusitania doesn't sink. So this is going to stay as is, and it's not going to get flipped over to its paradox form just yet, because right now it's still at least sort of okay. Okay, and then we'll just go on to the next person here. Let's see. So they're going to go ahead and play this, the Time Warp Rewind. They get to take anything and play it immediately. So they're going to take the Reverse Fate and play it. And, woo, I'm getting mixed up with my piles here. Let's see here. What do they need to do? Ooh, all sorts of fun stuff. They're going to go ahead and flip the Waco compound one. So the Waco standoff was diffused peacefully, which means that the Oklahoma City bombing did not occur. Now we've got 3 paradoxes. That's so many paradoxes. It's ridiculous. Okay? And we'll keep going and going and going. Halt the attack. Ooh, so we can stop Pearl Harbor, the Lusitania, or Waco, or a whole bunch of other things that I don't have the expansions for. You can see there's a whole lot there, right? So we'll go ahead and play that, and Pearl Harbor didn't happen, which means that D-Day also didn't. Well, nope, D-Day still happened. So you can see D-Day is only paradoxed if Hitler was assassinated and the Japanese did not attack Pearl Harbor. So let's see here. Aha. Atom bombs dropped on Japan are paradoxed if Hitler was assassinated or Pearl Harbor didn't happen or the Manhattan Project didn't happen. So that does flip to its paradox form. All right. So like I said, that's all I'll do for now, just so that you guys can get a good general idea of how it works. One thing that I didn't really go over is if you play a patch card, it's essentially a lost play because you're just helping to stave off losing the game. So if you do that, then that means that you actually immediately get to draw a card, which is kind of nice. To show you what I'm talking about with that, I'll just dig out one of the appropriate patches here. So what are we looking for? Looking for 19. There we go. Bam. 1917. There we go. So President Wilson keeps the U.S. out of the war. And if you remember, one of our guys here, I don't remember which one, part of their mission was for the 1917 patch to be in play. Wilson keeps the U.S. out of the war. So then to play this patch, let's say that this person got it, they would put it on top of the paradox. Oh, excuse me. They would put it on top of the paradox just like that and then draw a card. Now, that does count as their card played, though. So essentially, you're basically drawing 2 cards in order to play 1. So it's a pretty good deal, and excuse me. And essentially, the way that the rules describe it is it's the incentive from like the Time Bureau to have people try to fix any paradoxes that they run into. But with that, I'll go ahead and stop my my little demo here. I do hope that you enjoyed it. Like I said, it is a very, very cool game. It's a very unique game, and I think it does the timeline thing very effectively. So I hope you enjoyed my demo, and we'll go right on ahead now into my pros and cons for this game as well. I hope that you enjoyed my demo on how to play Chrononauts. As I mentioned, it's a really, really interesting game. I love that it's in the historical context. I love the fact that you can actually learn a little bit about how things work, what's going on, and more importantly, you have the idea of critical thinking in there where, you think, what would have happened if, World War II did not occur? What would have happened if John Lennon had not been assassinated? All of these kinds of things. It's really interesting, and it just becomes like a fun thought experiment, but it's in such a tiny little package. But with that, as always, we do have pros and cons. Pros, I've already mentioned many of them. Plays a large number of players, plays a large spread of players. The solitary game is pretty decent. It also plays very well with many players. The humor is there. It's relatively light, but it's the type of humor where you read it, it's just like, oh, that's kind of cute, that type of thing, and it keeps you interested. As with Flux, if you're playing a Flux that you're familiar with, that has a theme that then you're just kind of like, oh, I remember that thing, and it's just, it can really keep players interested, even though it is a short game. And that's another nice pro for this, is that it is such a short game that it means you can play multiple times, or it's a great filler game during a game night, things like that. It works out on so very many different levels. On the con side, there really aren't too many. The biggest one being that is the potential for people to be offended is what I've seen. And there's actually a little note in the instruction booklet that discusses like, oh, well, how can you people do this? How can you talk about these kinds of things in this context? How can you say like, what would happen if this hadn't occurred? Like you're sort of stomping on the memories of people who lived through these events. And I can really understand that, but at the same time, you have to realize the context in which this is presented. It's a fun game, and the entire point is that you're going through and trying to repair the timeline. That's really the idea. You're only there as like one of these time agent guys to try to fix what has gone wrong. And that's really the big thing. So it's again, I think that's probably the biggest con. Other than that, the other major con is that I can see people getting somewhat confused as to how like the patching system works, where it's like, okay, this is paradoxed, and I patch it and it's okay now. If we get too many paradoxes, then we're in big trouble though, and wait, what now? And just something like that where it can be difficult to wrap your head around, because again, in the end, it is about time travel, and time travel is not something that is really meant to be easy to wrap your head around. If it was easy to wrap your head around, then we wouldn't have any issue, right? But because of that, then I've seen people get somewhat confused about what the different things mean and why they're there, and when they need to play a patch, when they don't need to, when they can't. That's the other thing, is that Uber paradox that really can make people a lot more confused. So there's little things like that, but once you've played it, once or twice, then you can really start to get in the groove and really truly start to understand exactly how it works. Makes it tremendously easier. But with that, thank you very much for being here. I hope that you enjoyed my review and my gameplay demo. Remember, Eventually, the other video will be here talking about other time travel games, so I hope that you enjoy that whenever it comes out, whenever you guys are able to see it. But thank you very much for being here at this time, and I will see you, well, at some other point, whether it's before or after this. Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you very much for watching my review and gameplay demo for Chrononauts. I do apologize again for messing up on the timing just a little bit, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. Eventually everything will line up, right? But either way, thanks again for being here. If you want to see more of my work, then you can see some of the stuff linked up at the top of the page. And if you want to see more from me in the future, then go ahead and click that big giant subscribe button. Thanks very much again for being here, and I will see you next time as well as last time.